So just kind of walking through from there, this is again the elevated crossing at Adams. You can see the two-way bike lane on the top. Here's where we have that parking right adjacent to the bike lanes and no parking on the south side. So that's one area where it could be flipped to the other side of the street if we felt that was a better situation. And then when you get to the 30-foot wide section up past Polk, all the parking goes away. There's no parking from Polk all the way to the half a block east of Blaine. It's just 2 travel lanes, 2 bicycle lanes. And here you see those green crossings for the intersections at East City Park. And then coming out of it at Blaine, we go to a wider section so we can start adding parking back in on the south side of the roadway. The bike lanes continue with that configuration, parking on the south until we start the transition at the Mountain View intersection. Plan D, and this is kind of coming late to the party, and I know folks have wondered about how it came to be, and I talked about that a bit earlier, but again, this was just trying to capture some of the suggestions from the public comment period and the discussion, as brief as it was, with transportation. And essentially, it's a pretty basic concept using the existing structure that we have today with, of course, the modification of adding an island here in the median, and then going with what we have existing to the top of the hill, and once we reach Polk Street where we go to the 30-foot wide section, again, no parking, but instead of 2 lanes on the north curb line, we've got 1 westbound lane on the north, 1 eastbound lane on the south. They would be, as this is drawn, 11-foot wide travel lanes with 4-foot bike lanes. We talked about, could we go to a 10.5-foot travel lane with 4.5-foot bike lanes? Maybe. Our standard vehicular lanes and our street standards for this class of roadway is 12, so we're already under that. So there's a little question there. But as drawn here, it would be 11-foot with standard 4-foot bike lanes on either side, which again is the street standard that we have today for collector arterials and minor arterials, 2 travel lanes with bike lanes on either side. And just how that would progress as you got out past Blaine, where we'd start picking up parking again, east of Blaine, and then the transition back to the intersection at Mountain View. So it's pretty straightforward. One of the things that this option does, as option C does not, is this resolves the maintenance challenges, because there's nothing actually other than paint striping in the road section to get in your way when you're doing plowing and street sweeping. So it'd be similar to what's out there today with respect to maintenance. There's a diminishment in terms of traffic calming in that you no longer have that vertical element next to the travel lane that makes you feel constricted. It's paint. And a narrower painted travel lane is a traffic calming feature, but it's maybe not as effective as having that vertical element that the Plan C does in that buffer section. Okay, so that's the plans, and everybody always asks about the cost, so we'll talk about that briefly. We did preliminary estimates, and we came up with construction numbers for the 3 plans. We added some contingency, 20%, because the way the market is these days, you have to be careful. We added some potential funding for design and construction management, not knowing if this was all going to be in-house designed or bringing in some consultant assistance. So plans A and B are very similar. They are the most expensive because they include a lot of concrete work. All those curb bulbs or curb extensions add to the cost. And so that's where the biggest difference lies. Again, all of these plans include all the common things, so the 4-way stops and the raised crosswalks and all of that. But the differences that you really see in pricing are due to the fact that the construction of the curb bulbs, that's a lot of concrete work. Plan C is the lowest cost option amongst the 3. And that is because the concrete work goes out, you're adding in vertical elements that really aren't all that expensive, frankly. Now these particular ones are in yellow here because one of the things that we identified in looking at the maintenance issues on Plan C was that there are portions east of east of Hayes on the south side where there's not a tree lawn where we could store snow. And if we're going to have to push all the snow to the south away from the vertical delineators, we have to have a place to put it. And we're taking up all the road with travel lanes, so the tree lawn becomes the storage spot. Well, there's about a block and a half there east of Hayes where the sidewalk's up against the curb. So we're anticipating that those numbers would go up a little bit to potentially relocate that section of sidewalk off of the curb line. We haven't run the numbers on it, but that's why those are in yellow. You could see that Plan C costs come up a little bit due to that change if we implement that. I've not run a Plan D cost estimate. It's probably going to be similar to but cheaper than Plan C. Really the element that goes away are the vertical components in the buffer. Everything else is paint and then all the common core stuff. So similar but probably a little bit lower cost is what I'd anticipate per Plan D. This thing's a little hard to see, but I wanted to show you this list. This is the Children Pedestrian Safety Project ranking. Whew, a little fuzzy up there. This is a list that just came out recently, and this has to do with surplus eliminator grant funding for which we have applied. That was money that was made available for transportation-related projects, and specifically in this case for children pedestrian safety projects. And overall, there were 71 projects that submitted for a total asking price of about $12 million statewide. And there we are at the top, #1 ranking in the state, which is really cool, frankly. We were really pleased to see this. We believe the legislature's reached the point now where they've taken the actions necessary to allow this funding to occur. And so we're waiting for the notice from the granting agency as to whether or not we will actually receive this. We anticipate that we will with that ranking, and this is intended to help pay for some of those improvements within the corridor. This will supplement the funding that we've already established within the city budget, but it's just added funding to help us manage the cost within this corridor. So we're really pleased with that. So just wanted to point that out. At this point, I think what's before you is figuring out how you would like to proceed. And really, there are the questions of, is there a preferred plan? A reminder again that Plan C was the one preferred by the subcommittee and ultimately was the one preferred by the large majority of that 40% of the public input that stated a preference. The Transportation Commission again recommended Plan C. And then that takes me to the staff recommendation. So my opportunity to tell you what I think. Really what we are suggesting is that we proceed with the design of the common features. So all those things that are common to all the plans. We can start those really regardless of a decision tonight, assuming we're moving forward with corridor enhancement work. We could start that process of designing those features. We would recommend that we do hire a consultant to do a safety review of the two-way bike lane concept to help us understand if the concept that we've proposed will provide a safe corridor, including those potential conflicts at the intersections that we've talked about. Bringing in somebody that does this on a regular basis, who's seen these applied elsewhere, who can help us identify that, yes, it works, and here's some things you can do, whether it's education, signage, whatever it may be, to make sure it works. Or conversely, they might come back and say, well, it's maybe not the best application because of these reasons. Okay? So depending on how that comes out, I think it would be very beneficial for us to receive that further information to make sure that we are doing this correctly if Plan C is the way we are proceeding. Okay? If they come back and say, yes, that all looks wonderful, our staff recommendation is that we would proceed with Plan C, so we're consistent with all the other input that you've heard this evening. If, on the other hand, we find that it is not feasible for reasons that they would identify, and we're not able to find alternatives to fix those issues, then staff would suggest probably considering Plan D as maybe the next best choice. A and B just did not get a lot of traction with the community, and I think it had a lot to do with the fact that it was the shared bike lanes creating some concern. Plan D has its own issues, obviously. There's some concern about, is there enough traffic calming involved? There are features, again, consistent with all the plans, so we would have traffic calming as well. So the thought would be that probably Plan D, from a staff perspective, might be the next best choice.